All right. In this video, continuing on with our seller dashboard features, we're going to move into fulfillment logistics. So Chris, fulfillment's kind of a large loaded term, isn't it? Because we've got shipping, tracking, we've got customs and duties and print labels and BOMs and BOLs and every other acronym on the world, right? We've got intermodal, we've got all kinds of different shipping things. So fulfillment logistics can be quite large, especially when you're talking about a marketplace, right? Because when I go order something off Amazon and I'm ordering things from, I order 5 things, put it in my cart and I check out, it's going to charge me sales tax, but then the shipping and everything has to be figured out individually because the likelihood that those items are fulfilled from different vendors is really high, right?
That's right. And nowadays, pretty much every customer, even B2B customers, are mostly trained based on their positive experience with all of the different options that are available, that these things are just going to be taken care of. They're going to be built in and baked into their e-commerce experience. So really what you're wanting to do here is identify sort of the prioritized fulfillment logistics opportunities that you can automate in your scenario that'll have the highest payoff. What are some of the key areas that for your end customers are really going to matter for them so that you can automate those and make it really easy for your end users, right? And that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to sort of dive in and decompose this list and some of these opportunities for you and just help you think about them so you can identify what might make sense, what may not. And as always, we have timestamps in this video so you can jump ahead if you would like. And with that, Ron, I say we just dive right in here.
All right. So let's talk a little bit about the fulfillment logistics then. So we've got a marketplace. Someone comes to Clarity. We go to install them. The first thing they're going to do is sit down with their business analyst and start talking about all the requirements, the design, the types of products, the types of the vendor onboarding or the seller dashboards or the multi-store, right? All the different options, both configurable and customizable, that are in the platform. I mean, they could be working with a designer for a month. There's so many customizations that they can do, right? So when it comes to fulfillment logistics, what's the BA going to do? I'm going to sit down with you and I'm going to go, all right, Chris, how are you going to fulfill these products? Well, if you're Amazon, you do both. If you're Amazon Prime, you're warehousing some items, right? But if you're not Amazon and you're letting other people sell on Amazon, then those people are taking care of the fulfillment, the logistics, the shipping estimate, whatever the shipping rate is, the cost, all that kind of fun stuff. And then it's your responsibility as the marketplace that when that order gets placed, you split that order out and provide the information and details to that person. So that might also include, do we have to include the print ship label? Do we have to include a BOL, BOM custom ship and duty forms if they go buy on our marketplace and decide to ship to France? And we hand off the order to the person selling, or do they take care of that, right? There are so many different things. I'll just take the simple one. The simple one's tracking, right? Usually when we have a seller dashboard in the marketplace, where the seller can come in and see their orders, right? They're proactively notified that an order came in. They can come into their seller dashboard. There's an orders tab for order management. They can see the orders that have been placed. They fulfill the order. And when they fulfill the order or they change the status of the order, if they need to change it to accepted, confirmed, back ordered, shipped, and then they can paste the tracking code into the tracking field, which then notifies the end user, Chris, your package is shipped. Here's your code. You can track your own package, right? So the tracking part's easy. So I can take that one on because usually within the seller dashboard, sometimes when you're marketplace, you're doing the fulfilling and you're shipping things and then having someone like a FedEx or UPS pick it up, then usually we're going to have to integrate not just with their traditional estimator API, which is just a simple API call for how much it costs, but usually with their deeper API, which is like ShipStation, Ship Logistics, You Ship, We Ship, right? There's all these other 3PL APIs that is a bidirectional connection, so we can actually go back and get tracking status. We usually can't get this tracking status code from the API that gives us the shipping estimate unless it's that deeper API and they have an account, right? So if there's anything else you want to touch base on tracking, go ahead. And then if you want to move into some of the more difficult ones, like the intermodal shipping and customs and duties and anything else that we need to be aware of for the marketplace.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think tracking is a really interesting one. And really, this gets into, from a high level, the base question of how are you going to be handling the logistics for your sellers? What are you going to be offering them? And Ron, this can really be a prioritized sort of progression that you go through as a marketplace is what am I going to be starting out with that's viable? And then what am I progressing toward? And I think that's a really important set of questions to be able to answer at all times. And this should be something that you're constantly going through as a topic and an internal discussion. Maybe it's monthly, quarterly, definitely at least semi-annually. But either way, whenever you answer that question, you'll probably start with something simple. You may even have it set up so that all of your sellers fulfill from their particular location. Now, assuming that scenario, we have some basic communication that has to occur. With that, we need to be able to facilitate status updates on each individual shipment and the items that are contained within each shipment. And that needs to be sort of progressed through the chain as updates occur. So is it going into fulfillment? And then we notify the buyer. Is there an issue? Notify the buyer and then have a response from the marketplace as far as terms and how we resolve issues. What if the item is actually out of stock? How are we going to deal with that? What happens if the item is fulfilled and it's shipped, but it's damaged in process, during the shipment? Okay, we need a process for that. And these are the things that we want to encourage you to be thinking about because they will occur. They will occur and they will, ultimately impact your buyers' satisfaction as well as your sellers. So if the sellers are the ones directly incorporating this fulfillment capability, just like they would for their traditional business, then you're going to want to, at least as a minimum, be able to facilitate the communication between the buyer and the seller and help have an opinion about what minimums they need to communicate. And so, for example, this would be that the status is changing through the different steps in the process. It's going into fulfillment. They have shipped it. Here's the tracking info. The shipment was delivered. Here is the statement from the shipping company. And, now here's our policy for refunds or returns if needed. And just that as a minimum is sort of a baseline. But then the other thing, Ron, that I typically see is whenever marketplaces expand and grow, just like you implied for Amazon, for example, they're going to offer the ability, either through partners or directly, to be able to forward the inventory or distribute your inventory all over the world in sort of a regional geographic optimization of your inventory. Of course, this reduces lead time, but it can become a logistical nightmare if not handled properly. And so ultimately, we need to have sort of some questions that we're asking about that if this is something that we're going to do. A couple of those key questions you may want to consider. What is your algorithm and what's your logic for being able to suggest and properly distribute that inventory in a very, very low amount of inventory needed, sort of dramatically reducing the inventory required while still fulfilling the full amount of demand that's available? And, what percentage do you want to have as a buffer, or do you want there to even be sort of like always having a slight backlog or back ordering activity because you're just not wanting to have too much inventory on hand? Having a lot of inventory that's distributed can be risky. Now, the other thing to note is, what is the overhead and what is the cost behind this? And how are you passing that along to your sellers? Is this an extra fee? Is this just a delta in the percentage? Is this just directly passed along with no margin added to it? Your business will probably take on risk to do this inventory forwarding and distribution. So if your business is taking on risk, are you charging additional cost or margin, et cetera? And then, does it make sense to simply reduce that whenever a seller has enough volume? So you can say, look, there's risk for us whenever we don't have a lot of volume. Whenever you do have a lot of volume and you're consistent, then that risk goes down. So we know we're going to be able to purchase this facility or rent this facility or work with this 3PL company that has these distribution locations that we can sort of grow and scale up and down in. And so that's a key question as well. Now, the other thing that we typically will see is whenever you go to different regions, you sort of start out in a particular region and work with one or two key carriers, and then possibly take on different types of items that may require, LTL or full freight. They may require really custom insurance or hazardous handling. The list goes on. That can be a challenge in and of itself. So what are your thoughts on being able to handle that? And how are you considering offering this to the various different sellers? And again, sort of the thing that we want to encourage you to be thinking about is what's going to have the highest value for reasonably low cost that should be a priority within your marketplace. And what are your sellers and buyers going to be expecting? Because generally speaking, there are going to be competitors out there, whether it's a sort of proximate offering with another marketplace or a direct competitor. You should be able to analyze what some of the offerings are that you're going to want to bring to bear. And just like you said, Ron, this is something that we love to get to do where we can help your team dig in and analyze this together. And we can really help you understand, what some of your competitors are doing out there. And frankly, at the end of the day, probably one of the other key aspects of this is just going to be all of the different carriers that you can incorporate into the mix, as well as the different modalities. And like you were saying, Ron, dealing with potential customs and duties, all of the different regulations and rules, taxes, just overall shipping estimates and making sure they're accurate, fees that come back and reconciling those. And the list goes on. I've worked with so many clients who leverage different marketplaces, including Walmart, Wayfair, Amazon. Really pretty much any Etsy, any of the large marketplaces, and they sell on all of them. And these would be your sellers. They're probably going to be selling on all of the platforms. And so really what you want to do is sort of present the same opportunity to your seller as they're expecting from these other platforms. And that's it. If you boil it down, that's what you want to get to. And so ultimately, to me, this is really a matter of you deciding how much investment you want to put in and what you can get sort of off the shelf, and then how you can iteratively move toward these long-term opportunities that represent the same type of seller interaction that a Walmart, an Etsy, and Amazon will present as well. But this is a big arbitrage opportunity too, because they do some stupid things. They do some things that are really, really dumb and bloated and inefficient. And if we play our cards right together, or whatever vendor you work with for your marketplace, then we can really focus in and sharpen our pencils monthly, quarterly, semi-annually, and go attack by not doing things that are inefficient and really hyper focusing on things that are really smart. And that's where we can iteratively as a team move in the right direction optimally. But I'm curious, Ron, I put a lot out there. I'm curious if you want to decompose any of those in more detail.
Yeah, I love the comment you made about Wayfair and all the others, right? I'm constantly having conversations with those companies. And basically, that's the affiliate / omni-channel approach. And you want to be an active and a good player, right? You'd love to become a first-class citizen with those other players, right? That would be the panacea. But just boiling it down, when you're out, there's 3 different aspects that I would say, based on everything that Chris just said, that I would look for when you're going to talk to a vendor. You want to talk to a vendor like a Clarity who has done this, who actually knows what they're doing, who can literally talk deep, go really deep, and talk about the customizations and the pros and cons of all your options, right? Somebody who can actually share all the different opinions and help you form that opinion. And then the other 2 things, as far as the technology and platform, Chris just mentioned a comment about being out of the box or whether it has to be customizable, right? The 2 things that I kind of look for, and Clarity Ecommerce, our marketplace platform, has this out of the box. One, you want to make sure that there is a thing, and the way to call them is maybe like seller managed inventory, right? So when I'm a seller, I mentioned a minute ago about the seller being able to go in and update their own tracking code. Well, that's in the seller dashboard, which is what we're talking about right now. So within the seller dashboard, I can go in and manage my own inventory. So if I'm selling the same item Chris is selling, and we're both sellers on the same marketplace, then if I have 3 in stock and he's got 15 in stock and somebody's looking for 10, even if I'm $1 cheaper, they may go with Chris because they know they're going to save a lot of money in shipping because they can buy the whole lot from Chris, right? So you want to make sure that the sellers can manage their own inventory. That's the first one. The second one, and we have it in the platform as it's called multi-inventory, multi-warehouse. So we have an option within the platform. You can go in, and I'll bring a screenshot up here when I produce the video. And you can see here on the screenshot that up above, if I don't have it turned on, my inventory would be in this first line item. But down below now, you can see I've gone in and I've turned on a couple of additional warehouses. So I've got the Austin warehouse, I've got the Denver warehouse, and I can now track inventory at multiple locations. So as Chris said, if you're wanting to track and level your inventory out based on supply, demand, and lead times throughout the US, globally, whatever, you need to be able to track and have a centralized location that understands and knows where those are. What happens if I have inventory in Texas, inventory in Salt Lake? I'm in Denver and I order more units than the Salt Lake warehouse has. Do I fulfill and take everything out of the Salt Lake warehouse and ship the rest from Texas? Do I just ship from Texas and fulfill the whole thing to save money on shipping and I don't wipe out the Salt Lake warehouse? How do I offer that? How do I manage that? How does the system automatically implement that? So yeah, thanks, Chris. I really love that. I love the crawl, walk, run, right? Figure out what the MVP is, figure out what you have to do, get into the market, get going. And then one of the things that I like to do is implement, Chris calls it a feedback loop, right? Put in the ability to have a feedback loop where you get feedback and figure out how well it's working. At the same time, as Chris said, you're out evaluating your competitors and trying to match and then exceed the experience that they're serving up to their clients. And over time, that's really what breeds success. Anything else you want to tie off on fulfillment before we move on to the next one, Chris?
I just wanted to put a little pun out there and note that if you handle your fulfillment properly, it can be very fulfilling to your end customers. And all puns aside, we encourage you on this topic, if you would like more information. This is really detailed depending on your industry, and it's something that we really love getting into. We've done so much work here, and it's really interesting how powerful the APIs are with different 3PL providers, customs and duties, estimations, and automation. Print, pack, and ship automation that can be done, just total system automation around inventory distribution, etc. And we've done it all. And, I've personally gone on site and been a part of different warehouse planning, touring and going through warehouses, working with the scanning devices, working with all the different carriers personally, dozens of carriers. The list goes on, like I said, and we just really love this stuff. I think it would be safe to say, Ron, that we have quite a few nerds that just really nerd out on these things. And that's what you need for a project like this, is some folks who really enjoy and are passionate about this automation and optimization. And again, all puns aside, but find it very fulfilling to help you automate your process.
Agreed. So that closes off fulfillment. The next item that we're going to cover today in the seller dashboard is orders management. Now, orders management can be a real deep topic, and we can go into, and it touches base a little bit on fulfillment, right? We just did fulfillment, and orders management talks about fulfillment, but it also talks about potentially integrating into the ERP. It talks about lead times, creating a pick ticket, updating the status, fulfilling the order, reporting on your orders, making it easy when a seller comes in. How many outstanding orders do I have right now? How many orders came in today? How many orders are over time? Are any over lead time? All the kinds of different things that a seller would need to know, or you would need to know in your marketplace. Again, this video is within the seller dashboard right now. So we're really talking about the seller dashboard. I'm a seller. I'm on Amazon. I'm selling my wares. I want to go in, and how do I manage my orders that have been sold on Amazon. And there's a bunch of different ways. One, I can have an EDI or an API integration with Seller Central, so that order comes in automatically into my ERP for me to fulfill. Or two, I get an email notification from the platform because I haven't afforded or didn't set up the integration. So I get an email that says, hey, here's an order that needs to be fulfilled. I log in, I look at the seller dashboard, I look at my orders tab, and I see that there's 5 new orders. And now I need to go in and fulfill those orders. So that's just kind of an overview of what we're talking about when it comes to orders management. Chris, let's go ahead and dive in and start covering some of the technicality of what is orders management and what are the important features that need to be able to help us automate, improve the efficiency of processing orders as a seller.
Yeah, really good point. And ultimately, the main thing that I would say here is that we sort of have different levels of this integration and automation around order management. The first is going to be what I would refer to as transactional level or manual, where the seller gets a notification, buyer receives notification, and it's basically akin to the old days where you had a fax machine that you would push and pull data to different parties, but via email instead. So email notifications and fulfillment, and then the ability to, as a seller, go into the dashboard and update things manually. This is probably the most important thing, is having a really solid process for this, to be able to just receive orders, understand what the notifications are, have a simple dashboard where the seller can go and see, orders that are coming up for fulfillment that have to be sent out, when they are suggested to be sent out by, and sort of an escalatory visual that the seller can see so that they never miss anything. I can't really overstate how important that is. However, with that said, ultimately, we want to get to a point where the process is further automated. So it's not just a system where the seller is going in manually and getting data and the buyer is receiving notifications, manually. But in particular for the seller, we want to be able to allow them to bulk download orders, and receive those in a automation format as best possible. For a lot of the different sellers, they may have distributed inventory. So this may be in multiple distribution centers. They may have, through us, a distributed inventory system. We may be leveraging drop shipping or some form of, partnership that we're bringing in. And whenever this sort of starts to happen and we start to scale this up, automation and doing things in bulk is going to be necessary. It really just won't be logistically possible otherwise. And so what I want to say here is we need to be able to take all of this data and all of the fidelity of the data around the nuances of the order, the specifics of where it should be optimally fulfilled from to reduce lead time, and basically all of the details associated to the order, and be able to properly distribute this to the right endpoints, either through bulk data. So think, CSV file, large delimited text file that folks can download. They can schedule downloads of this, or ideally, even further, an API. And this could be EDI, it could be just a REST API, set of REST API endpoints, etc. But there's sort of a progression here, Ron, where they go from having a simple interface and email notifications to having bulk download capability and the ability to automate that on a schedule. And then finally getting to where they have API integration. And that API integration can go pretty deep. So we can actually integrate to the different ERP systems, different warehouse management systems, and just overall fulfillment and logistics systems. So this can include, enabling automation such that if you already have a pick and pack system, if your sellers already have a pick and pack system, we can push the data all the way through their system through integration to that end, so that they're really not having to change anything that they're doing whenever they're working with your marketplace. And this is probably the panacea, or sort of like the ultimate endpoint that we look to get our customers to. And ultimately, the big question is, when do you want to get there by? Does it make sense to progress to that point immediately? Or is that something that, from a financial investment perspective, it makes sense to phase into? And I'm curious what your thoughts are on this, Ron, and any details you might elaborate on any of these points.
Yeah, I mean, I love the crawl, walk, run, and I agree with everything that you said, right? So, for example, I mean, you look at platforms like eBay. eBay, I sold on eBay back in the 80s and 90s, right? Back in the day. I haven't, and I've still every once in a while buy something on eBay. That platform hasn't innovated, hasn't even changed, right? They found something, and most of it's manual, right? They've got that manual dashboard. There is no integration. If I want to go sell, I don't know, make something, if I want to go sell a Pokemon card today on eBay, it's exactly the same as it was back in the 90s, 30 years ago. I literally log in, I got a seller dashboard. I have to sign up. I create an auction. I place my card. I take a picture. I set a price. I set my shipping. When it sells, I manually get an email. I mean, nothing has changed. And yet you look at other platforms and, they're fully automated. Now, why would eBay not need to fully automate? Why would they not need to continuously innovate and improve? Well, maybe there's one, not a lot of competition out there. And two, if I sat down with them to build that platform today, one of the answers when I ask, who is taking care of the fulfillment? How is that all happening? The first thing they're going to say is, oh, we don't have to deal with any of that because they don't warehouse anything. They don't stock anything. They don't inventory anything. They don't have to track any of that kind of stuff, right? All they want to do is have an aggregated dashboard that really tells them what's going on, let them take their percentage of every deal, and have an extremely well thought out and well documented governance policy that manages all the stuff, the quote unquote stuff that's going to happen, right? Other than that, it just all happens by emails that go to the seller, go to the buyer, and it's like, hey, your auction closed and sold. You need to ship the item. So they just send an email out, and then it's the seller's responsibility. And how do they, through governance, really enforce most of that? Through ratings, right? First thing they do is if I don't ship on time, or if I don't ship the item that is in the quality that I claim it is, right? Or it's very clear when the item is received that the picture I took of the item and posted is much newer than the quality of the item when it actually shipped, right? Well, then that buyer is going to come in and give me 1 star, and it's going to affect my ability to sell on that platform. So for them, they haven't had to, because they've got a great governance policy. And because of the gamification and the ability for everybody to rate each other, right? And the importance of that rating, just literally 1-to-1 makes or breaks your business, it kind of just manages itself, and they haven't needed to. Well, other platforms that aren't out there that can carry that same level of clout, you need to automate. So when you're going out there trying to compete with someone who owns that space, like an eBay, right? How do you compete with them? Well, really, it's by providing a better experience, right? Make it easier, make it a better experience, make it more automated, make it faster, make it cheaper, whatever adjective you want to use. Make it a better experience for both the buyer and the seller. And you will, the other thing Chris did, you'll be successful. Let me finish my sentence. You'll have some success. However, Chris always has great advice on this one. He's like, find your niche, right? If you've listened to any of our webinars before, you'll hear Chris talk about that. Find your niche, go in and master that niche, and then you can land and expand, right? So don't go in head on and try to take on eBay and displace them tomorrow. But if you're the world's greatest at sports cards, right, and you want to have an auction site that does nothing but dealing with sports cards, and you go master that, then maybe you move into sports memorabilia, and then maybe it's sports jerseys, and then maybe, doesn't really matter what it is, and then you become the biggest name out there in sports to buy and exchange and sell sports stuff, right? Kind of like autotrader.com. There's many, many of them out there, but everybody knows that name, right? They've made it, but they also expanded into motorcycles and boats and trailers and other things as well. So that's probably what I would say about that. Anything you want to close off on orders management, Chris, before we end this topic?
Yeah, I would say that's exactly right with the niche focus. And ultimately, the big thing that we want you to take away from this is that it can be highly, highly automated. But, it makes sense to work with a partner who can help you to selectively progress through that process. You're operating a business, not a charity. It's not an academic enterprise. And to that end, you need to work with partners that aren't going to just myopically focus on what's possible, but what makes sense within what's possible. And being able to execute really within a business, that is the key capability. It's the actual execution and optimizing the sequencing of that execution and use of the capital. It's not the ability to execute. It's actually doing it really well and really intelligently as you progress. And so we really encourage you to look for a partner who's focused on that. It's really taking it to a whole nother level of not just being able to do the thing, but help you decide when each of the things should be done. And we certainly welcome the opportunity to discuss with you around your project. As we like to say in a lot of these webinars, we just really love working on this. It's a huge passion of ours, and we'd like to be able to transfer that to the work that you see and the output you see with your marketplace.